I'm Faye Kwan and you're watching It's About Youth, where we're speaking to Malaysia's younger generation on the issues that matter to them ahead of GE15. Today we'll be looking at the youth's take on climate change, the consequences of which have threatened our daily lives. Now, we've seen various countries experiencing severe weather conditions, including Malaysia, where many have been affected and continue to be affected by the increasingly frequent storms and floods. Yet the ones to bear the brunt of this will be the youth, especially in terms of securing their livelihoods, incomes and food security. So here to discuss this further, we have Eqram Mustaqeem, also known as Muya, a member of the Malaysian Youth Delegation, as well as Aidil Iman Aidid, an environmentalist and the Advocacy Director of Kolektif Iklim. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, to start off, Aidil, let's start with you. Previously, I mentioned the floods, but we've also been seeing prolonged heat waves, and Malaysians are very familiar with the haze phenomenon. So, what do you think? Do you think Malaysia is doing enough to incorporate environmental and climate change considerations into its policies?
Right. So I think there are a lot of nuances when it comes to Malaysia's, climate goals or even climate achievements. If we're looking into indexes like the Green Future Index, Malaysia is considered as a climate laggard, which is we're making uneven and slow progress in securing a green future. I believe our position in that index is about, I think, the 56th country. And there is another sort of index that focuses on climate resilience by the Swiss Re Institute, and Malaysia is positioned at the 47th, meaning we have a low sort of placing when it comes to creating climate resilience. Yes, we've had achievements in terms of progress in the 12th Malaysia Plan, in our national budgets, but those are commitments, not necessarily implementations. So a lot of the focus in Malaysia's climate achievement is also disproportionately focused on climate mitigation, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. But like you said, heat waves, floods, storms, we're not building enough resilience against these weather patterns. And I believe that is a focus area that Malaysia and this newly formed government, hopefully soon on the 19th of November, can focus more on.
Essentially, we're making baby steps, but we should be taking even bigger strides.
Right.
Muya, let's get your thoughts on this. In your opinion, how committed is Malaysia to some of its multilateral environmental agreements, for example, like the Paris Agreement?
All right, thank you, Faye. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Astro AWANI for inviting us youth on this very big platform on the national television stage. I think it's very valuable for youth today. And the second point I'd like to make is I'm the fifth person from UIA who's speaking on this matter. There's my friends who spoke on the same stage as well. So UIA is really successful in churning out great advocates and activists. It's maybe in the shawarma that they feed us every day. So when we talk about Malaysia's commitment, I'll echo what Aidil has said before. So Aidil said that Malaysia is a laggard, and that's true to a very certain sense, because in observing our obligation towards these agreements that we partake in, the boundaries or the targets are set by ourselves. So it's very easy to set a very low bar, and you can fulfill that bar anytime you want, and you can push for it very, very easily. So Malaysia is a party in 19 multinational environmental agreements. But when we talk about the things on climate change, it's Paris Agreement and Malaysia being a party to the UNFCCC being the most important. So Malaysia originally had a target of 30% emission intensity reduction by 2030. And because of that target, in 2019, we already, I quote YB Yobin, our previous MASTEC minister, in 2019, we already reached the target of 33%. So we were only lacking 2% on the 2030 target, meaning we had 11 years in advance to really get that target. So what Malaysia did was, we increased our target to 45%, and we have a remaining 12% for us to implement in a matter of 11 years. So there's a lot of time. We're very comfortable in taking our strides. So if we measure our commitments based on the targets that we make, Malaysia is very committed. Malaysia is one of the nations that submit its reports and its documents on time. Malaysia is one of the countries that is brave and fast in terms of submitting its NDCs, the targets that we make as a nation. But if you measure commitment on that stage, we are just being jago kampung in a sense, in Malay. So if you really want to measure success and commitment, you have to dream big, we have to be ambitious. And ambition starts from leadership that we put in positions of power, be it in Mestek or CASA right now. So if you really want to dream big, put people who you believe can dream big and implement these big dreams on the biggest stage possible. Yeah,
and
that's for me.
always aiming to exceed expectations.
Definitely, but I think it's important as well to be grounded in reality.
Yep, for sure. So we have established where Malaysia stands. What do you guys think is the value of youth advocacy when in the climate movement, Aidil?
Right. I think the youth provides a sort of like a diverse group of people. You know, when you talk about young people are sort of at the front lines of climate justice activism, right? But it's also a very diverse group of young people. We have persons with disabilities who are young. We have seen a lot of climate movements like Klima Action, Malaysian Youth Delegation being led by young women as well. So we are creating a lot more of diversity at that forefront right now, and I think that's such a important thing to set across, because it creates policies that are, for example, gender responsive policies when it comes to creating flood resilience. You know, what sort of challenges are pregnant women facing during crises of flooding, right? You know, what kind of mobility policies do they need? Or persons with disability, what kind of policies do they need? So I believe young climate justice activists are putting that at the forefront. And we're constantly working together side by side. MYD, Kolektif Iklim, Klima Action. These organizations are not scared to collaborate with each other. And I think that's very pivotal as well. We are seeing a push from government and corporations, MNCs and so on, where they want to involve young people. But at the same time, when we talk about young people, there's this one problem where we set the age of young people they want to engage with at 18 years old and above. How about children, right? They might not be voting in the next coming election, but they will vote one day. And we have this misconception that children don't know about climate change, but that's completely false. They talk about climate change in ways that we can understand as well. They might not talk about the climate crisis like both you and me and all three of us here, but they do, and they do experience that as well. So there needs to be a greater push when it comes to youth advocacy to involve children as well in climate justice representation, in any environmental decision making as well.
Essentially viewing everything from different perspectives and
Right.
really not leaving anyone behind.
Yes, correct.
And so that's in Malaysia, but Muya, you'll be, as I know, you'll be representing the Malaysian Youth Delegation at COP27 in Egypt coming soon. What would you say, how significant is the youth voice when it comes to climate negotiations on an international stage?
When we talk about youth, it's about talking the most vulnerable group towards climate change. Because why? Because climate change is a thing that takes duration for it to have its most devastating impact. So the longer we don't take action, the worse the results would be in the near future or even in the distant future. And who will be living in these futures, in this dystopia of realities that's distracted by climate change? It will be the young people. So when we talk about climate change, there's this concept we call it intergenerational equity. Intergenerational equity means that we do things for the sake of our young people so that they can flourish in their own time and world in the future. So when talking about COP and talking about the intersectionalities between youth and COP, it's about giving them a voice at COP, the highest level possible, for them to voice out their concerns. Sometimes people see the youth voice as being naive, as being uneducated or unwell informed. But another perspective that we should look at it, perhaps from people like Greta, who's always speaking out, is that the voice of youth is unfiltered, it's honest, and it's straight to the point. And in the world of diplomacy and bureaucracy, that is something that's always missing in terms of international discussion and negotiations. So I believe that the voice of youth has its significance because they are the most affected. I've brought studies, but I think I won't have time to present them all. And then one thing I would like to add, last thing, being at COP, it's very saturated with rich countries, people who are privileged, even companies who are the biggest polluters in terms of carbon emissions. So having this youth balance, having this reality check towards people who are in power, gives the discussion at least some form of balance and some sort of equity to the people who are involved in the climate struggle as a whole.
Right, you're absolutely right when you say that the ones who will be most affected by the climate crisis will be the youth. And in fact, the youth are, quote unquote, often described as the ones who are responsible for ending climate change. And when you talk about how we need to incorporate more youth voices, how then should our leaders better accommodate youth perspectives and needs in its policies to address climate change? Aidil?
Yeah, I think it's important to have, I think it's gaining momentum, it always has been, and this is apparent at COP as well, and it's apparent in the past government where the youth are constantly engaged in governmental decision making when it comes to the environment. But can it be improved? Of course. This is true, for example, financial assistance. Programs that provide seed funding for youth initiatives would be great. To say that we will support in financial capacity for your advocacy projects. And I think this was really apparent in one of the programs that UNICEF did with KBS. I think it's the Youth Impact sort of like seed funding, about 5,000 Malaysian ringgit allocated for youth projects focused on climate action, biodiversity conservation, and so on. So these are kind of like one of the steps that can be amplified more and more so that, it's important for us to have a sort of like a seat at the table, but we also need financial support in order for us to sustain movements like MYD, Kolektif Iklim, and these other, organizations. Really important as well. Another perspective that I would highlight is based on UNICEF's report on the impact of climate change on Malaysian children, right? One of the things that they brought forward as a policy is giving more inclusive participation for children to access to climate action dialogues, for them to also have a seat at the table. We can't just have a lot of 18-year-olds, above 18-year-olds at the table. We need children as well, And I think that's an important representation to have in the government. And I think I'm hopeful that, come this GE15, that this newly formed government will consider the voices of children when they think about youth as well.
Mm-hmm. So really, not just looking at youth as 18 and above, but really below that as well, and incorporating their voices. And it's very important for our current leaders to encourage and support the future leaders with our nation's development. All right, very important points, Meet, and we'll talk a bit more about supporting the youth in terms of the climate movement. But before that, let's hit for a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back to It's About Youth, where today we're looking at the youth's take on climate change, together with Aidil, Iman, Aidid, an environmentalist and advocacy director of Kolektif Iklim, as well as Eqram Mustaqeem, also known as Muya, a member of the Malaysian Youth Delegation. Now, previously, we discussed where Malaysia stands in the environmental scheme of things, in climate action, and also the importance of incorporating the youth voice and people below the age of 18, children, in addressing climate change. But moving forward, I'd like to get you guys' thoughts on this. How can we engage the youth to get more involved in building a greener future, or helping to amplify efforts that are already underway? Muya?
I'll echo what Aidil has also said. So I'll just bring up this survey that the UNICEF Malaysia has done, which is 92% of young people think that climate change is a crisis. So what that means is there's clearly that interest, there's clearly that baseline that everyone agrees on the same thing. Mm-hmm. So it's a first step that we can build on, and we can move on from that. So how do we engage youth to be more involved in building a greener future, or amplifying the efforts that we have already made? So I think first and foremost, it's about things that AWANI is doing right now. It's about engaging young people, giving them a platform to speak. I think it's easier to engage with young people if it's the truly young people who are speaking to them, instead of someone who's older and trying to preach something to young people.
To make it more relevant.
Yeah, to make it more relevant and make it understandable and able to be contextualized in their sense. Mm-hmm. So I think that's important as well. I think AWANI has done a great job in doing that. So second thing is raising capacity. So raising capacity means raising their understanding, giving them empowerment to do things on their own. So a lot of things that they are done today are done, most of it, by individual actions or initiatives that youth themselves initiate on their personal capacity. But imagine if this same energy is also collaborated by different partners or different people, corporations, government. Imagine if everyone had the same energy to build the capacity of a young people. We won't just be living in a better future in terms of the climate sense. We will live in a better future in the overall sense, Malaysia as a country. So lastly, I think it's important to also listen to them and give them a platform to voice out and give them a proper platform to discuss. Most of the time, I think some people think that youth are people who should only listen, who shouldn't speak because they are probably young people, they don't know their stuff. But it's important for us to refix or unlearn that thing because we live in an age of constant information, an age of information overload. I think young people nowadays know a lot better than even myself and the older people today because they are engaged with the global world in terms of the internet and whatnot. So it's important for us to listen to their perspectives and listen what do they have to say, and then incorporate those lessons that they have given us in the general sense when we are implementing something that is for their betterment. I think that's important as well. If we are really serious in incorporating the youth agenda in climate change.
Really coming back again to providing the youth a seat for negotiations. But I'd also like to tap on to the part where you said, the youth are informed. They do look into the internet, and 92% believe that climate change is a pressing issue. But I believe the youth as well, they often tend to get at least at the very start, their information from social media, all on current affairs, including climate change. So in this context, do you think we should also look at education institutions and for more awareness on the environment, teaching our youths?
All right.
Yeah.
So I'll just give a quote. I think I'll just echo what something that's being done already in the government. So in 2018, 2019, there was this constant discussion of having subject alam sekitar or environmental subject in our primary schools and our secondary schools. So it was supposed to be implemented in 2019 because I'm no longer a student in the primary school or secondary schools in Malaysia. I don't know what's the development, but it was supposed to be implemented in 2019. But when we talk about this, even though if it's not implemented or whatnot, we have to acknowledge that there is a solid plan there by the government. So we have to acknowledge and give props to that. If you go to schools or you go to bookshops, there's textbooks for Asas Kelestarian, which is the basics of environmentalism, being sold in a public shop or in a bookshop. Everywhere you can find it. So in a sense, there's that framework. There's that sense of formalizing climate change and environmental education in our educational institutions. But sometimes, maybe somewhere along the way, these things, they aren't implemented as well as they were planned to. So maybe there's something lacking on that. But I believe that if we truly formalize climate change or environmental studies in a holistic sense, not just saying that, oh, you're a STEM student or you're an environmental sciences student, so you should focus on climate change. But no, but look at it from a holistic sense. Oh, you're a computer science student, give us data on how we can make climate change something quantified and something easily approachable. Or you're a law student, give us policies and law that can develop our actions towards climate change. So if you look at it from this holistic and general sense, I think everyone can contribute. So that's the purpose. If you are truly serious in talking about education and climate change, it has to be holistic and it has to be general and applicable to everyone in the general sense.
Yes, and it's important for everyone to contribute because it does affect everyone. Right? Climate change affects all livelihoods. Sorry, I didn't.
Sort of like wanted to add that as well is like creating resilient infrastructures in schools. This means that schools can actually withstand, or universities even, can withstand climate change challenges. I think one of the disruptions that we've had is during transboundary haze season when schools are shut down, right? And we've managed to sort of like be resilient during COVID by having Zoom classes during lockdown and these MCO. So that kind of application can also be applied during seasons of transboundary haze pollution, right? So it's important not only for education system to be holistic, but it's also important for the whole infrastructure to be resilient against environmental hazards and risks. A lot of disruptions happen when sort of like landslides block the pathway of children to go to school, the transboundary haze season, or any other climate change related challenges. So making sure that schools stay resilient in terms of infrastructure is really important, but making sure that teachers are well prepared, that they have the right needed support system to be equipped to teach about climate change, to make sure that the subjects that we're teaching are optimistic as well. A lot of the things that me and I hope Muya as well are learning are based on climate change that is the end of the world. A lot of it is projecting this doomism onto us, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. But the education system provides this ray of hope that it can be optimistic, but also avoid greenwashing as well. It has that potential value to teach children that they can be optimistic about the future instead of depending on news of climate change doomism on news outlets.
That's a very interesting point about instilling hope, that there is essentially still hope for the country. Well, on that note, as we head towards GE15 and the campaigning period, what would you like to see from your next elected government right now with the political parties and their candidates when addressing climate change? Aidil, maybe we can start with you.
Right, and I think this is an important platform to share. I think Makaranga, which is an environmental journalism platform, has released an article about a collection of GE15 demands from various environmental groups like Gabungan Darurat Iklim Malaysia, as well as templates to send to, an email template to send to political candidates. So I highly encourage Malaysians overall, including politicians, to go to Makaranga, the platform online, and see this article and read this article about the collective demands of various environmental groups. They are very diverse. They are based on tenets of environmental justice. They want better climate change resilience. They want a just transition into a cleaner energy. And I think that really matters right now, and it's really important.
And how about you, Muya? What would you like to see from political candidates this coming GE15 in addressing climate change?
So I think it's simple. It's important that if we are really truly want to advance our climate struggle, politicians and political parties have to have manifestos that highlight the climate crisis and also be steadfast in implementing it when they are in power. So there's two dimensions to it: promises and actions taken. So I think it's an exciting period for the general election that is coming soon, because this week I think every political party will be releasing their manifestos. So I'll be looking forward to reading their manifestos and looking if they have considerations for the environment or for the climate, because I think that's a very big pull factor, especially in terms of the urban area voters in Malaysia. So I think I can highlight a few campaigns that are being done by certain political parties. So PKR with Rafizi, they're doing the Ayuh Malaysia campaign, and they are really strong in the climate message that they are giving. They are really focusing on adaptation and pressuring the government in focusing on adaptation in Malaysia and using that as their point to gain votes in the next general election. PH also as a whole, they released the 5 janji kepada anak muda atau 5 promises to young people in Malaysia, in which one of them was the implementation of the Climate Change Act, which in itself is already in the works by the current government. So we can see that climate change is very good in Malaysia because it's not politically divided. Hopefully we don't come to a point where we are like America, where climate change is a very political term and people from political divides fight over something that's actually being confirmed by science. Lastly, if the political parties, they don't have any ideas on climate change or environmental agendas in their manifesto, I'll promote Manifesto Rakyat, a manifesto that's made by a lot of advocacy group and CSO alliance that promotes a lot of things that can be easily adopted, contrary to what we commonly do, where plagiarism is disliked or is disinterested in. Manifesto Rakyat preaches the message that they want the political parties to use their manifesto to gain votes from the rakyat. So, yeah, hopefully we'll see more manifestos from the political parties that implement climate and environmental policies that are progressive in our country. But I think last point, Faye, sorry for taking too much time. Manifestos by political parties and politicians are manifestations of the desires of the rakyat. So if the rakyat itself isn't serious enough about talking about climate change, talking about environmental issues and agendas, then the energy won't be reciprocated by political parties. Political parties are there to gain votes, and the votes are gained from your interest in their manifestos. So make sure you have this climate interest in yourself if you really want the political parties to reciprocate that energy. So yeah, thank you.
Not just making these promises, but also really going through with them and implementing them as well. Now, really, we're almost towards the end, but just really quickly, with the implementation of Undi 18, we'll be seeing 6 million new voters. Now, that was on political parties, but when it comes to voters, what role do their votes play in protecting the environment, Aidil?
Right. I think it's important to acknowledge that your vote on 19 November really matters to the environment. You know, it's really important because it decides whether the newly formed government will either stay stagnant or move forward with environmental policies and the overall climate governance in Malaysia. And that is a position to remind yourself of what has transpired before, despite warnings from Malaysia, actual climate experts, to not proceed with the election due to climate change, worsening flood situation in Malaysia during this during this month. Let that remind you of anger, frustration, and who decided to not listen to science, and let that transpire when it comes to voting. Let that climate anxiety, climate anger, climate grief actually manifest itself on who you want to vote, and that is really important. On that day, you will decide whether we would have a climate-smart government, whether we would have more better informed and improved system of environmental justice, and to create better environmental policies as well. So I would remind Malaysians to remind themselves of that frustration, of that climate anxiety on that day, and let who you choose transpire.
And also because limiting climate change really requires effective policies and solutions, only which the people in power can implement. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been speaking to Aidil, Iman, Aidid, as well as Eqram Mustaqeem on It's About Youth. As we've mentioned, be sure to exercise your right to vote on November 19th. I'm Faye Kwan. Thank you for joining us on It's About Youth. See you next time.